how to reinvent yourself and get what you want in life. Listen carefully, because this is not just motivation, this is instruction. There comes a moment in every human life where you look at yourself and quietly admit something isn't working. Not because you are weak, not because you are incapable, but because you have outgrown the version of yourself that you're still trying to live in. Reinvention is not about becoming someone else. It is about returning to the truth of who you were always designed to be, but this time doing it on purpose. You cannot step into a new life with an old mindset. That's where most people get stuck. They want new results, but they're still thinking the same thoughts, holding the same beliefs, tolerating the same habits. You don't change your life by wishing. You change your life by reconstructing the way you see yourself. You were not created to drift. You were designed with intention, and anything created with intention must be managed with intention. If you don't decide who you're becoming, life will assign you an identity. And usually it's one built from fear, limitation, and other people's expectations. Reinvention begins with a decision, not a feeling, not a burst of inspiration, a decision, a line drawn in your mind where you say, this version of me is no longer enough for where I'm going. And understand this, once you make that decision, everything will begin to test it. Your environment will resist it. Your habits will fight it. Even your own thoughts will question it. That doesn't mean you're on the wrong path. That's confirmation that you've started something real. You must first redefine your identity. Before you change what you do, you must change who you believe you are, because behavior always follows identity. If you still see yourself as someone who procrastinates, you will find a way to delay. If you still see yourself as someone who lacks discipline, you will always negotiate with your own potential. But when you decide deeply and clearly, I am a disciplined person, your actions begin to align with that declaration. Words are powerful, but only when they are believed. So don't just repeat affirmations. Build evidence. Start small. Keep promises to yourself. Every time you do what you said you would do, you reinforce a new identity. And identity is the foundation of transformation. You also have to become uncomfortable with comfort. The life you want lives on the other side of the habits you're avoiding. Growth does not feel safe. It feels uncertain, inconvenient, sometimes even lonely, but comfort is expensive. It costs you your potential. It costs you your future. And most people don't realize the price until years have passed. Reinvention requires separation, not from people necessarily, but from patterns. There are behaviors, routines, and even environments that cannot follow you into your next level. You have to be honest enough to recognize them and disciplined enough to release them. That might mean waking up earlier. It might mean saying no more often. It might mean being misunderstood for a while. That's part of the process. You don't get what you want in life by focusing on what you want. You get what you want by becoming the kind of person who naturally attracts it. Success is not something you chase. It is something you grow into. And growth demands consistency, not intensity. Consistency. Anyone can be motivated for a day. Anyone can feel inspired after a speech, a video, or a moment of clarity. But reinvention is not built in moments. It's built in repetition. What you do daily shapes you permanently. The small disciplines you practice quietly will eventually produce loud results. You must also learn to manage your mind, because your greatest battle is not outside. It is internal. Doubt, fear, insecurity. These are not signs that you cannot succeed. They are signals that you are stepping beyond what is familiar. And the mind always tries to protect what is familiar, even if it's limiting. So you train it. You don't obey every thought. You question it. You redirect it. You replace it. Because if you don't take authority over your thinking will take authority over your life. And let's be clear about something. Reinvention is not a one-time event. It is a lifestyle. Every level you reach will require a new version of you. That's the journey. That's the responsibility. And that's the privilege. You are not stuck. You are simply operating from a version of yourself that has expired. The moment you accept that, you take your power back. And when you take your power back, everything begins to change. Redefine your identity before you change your life. The greatest mistake most people make when they try to change their life is that they focus on what they need to do instead of who they need to become. They chase habits, routines, strategies, and external actions, hoping those things will produce a new life. But behavior is always a reflection of identity. You don't consistently act against who you believe you are. That means if your identity doesn't change, your life won't either, not in any lasting way. You can force yourself to wake up early for a few days, maybe even a few weeks. You can push yourself to work harder, to stay disciplined, to do the right things. But if deep inside you still see yourself as someone who lacks discipline, someone who is inconsistent, someone who struggles, eventually your actions will fall back in line with that belief. Because identity always wins over effort. This is why reinvention must begin at the level of identity. You have to look at yourself honestly and ask a difficult question. Who do I believe I am? Not who you want to be, not who you pretend to be in front of others, but who you truly believe you are when no one is watching. Because that version of you, the one in your mind, is the one running your life. If you believe you are not good enough, you will sabotage opportunities that could prove otherwise. If you believe you are not capable, you will hesitate at moments that require courage. If you believe you are unlucky, you will overlook possibilities that are right in front of you. Your beliefs are not just thoughts. They are instructions that shape your behavior. So the first step in redefining your identity is awareness. You cannot change what you refuse to confront. You have to become aware of the internal narrative that has been guiding your decisions for years. And for many people, that narrative didn't even start with them. It came from past experiences, from failures, from criticism, from the labels others placed on them. Maybe someone once told you that you're not smart enough. Maybe you failed at something important and quietly decided that success wasn't for you. Maybe life didn't go the way you expected and you built an identity around disappointment. Over time, these experiences formed a story, and you've been living inside that story ever since. But here's the truth. Your past may explain you, but it does not define you. Identity is not fixed. It is constructed. And anything constructed can be reconstructed. The problem is most people treat their identity like a permanent label instead of a flexible blueprint. They say things like, that's just how I am, or I've always been this way. But that is not true. That is conditioning. And if something was conditioned into you, it can be reconditioned out of you. Reinvention begins the moment you challenge the identity you've been carrying. You have to make a decision that the old version of you is no longer acceptable, not because you hate yourself, but because you respect your potential too much to stay the same. This is not about self-rejection. It's about self-elevation. And once you make that decision, you must define a new identity with clarity. Who are you becoming? Not in vague terms, not in general ideas. Be specific. Are you becoming disciplined, focused, consistent, confident, courageous? What does that look like in real life? Because a clear identity gives direction to your actions. Without clarity, you drift. With clarity, you move with purpose. If you decide, I am a disciplined person, then discipline is no longer something you try to do. It becomes something you express. It becomes part of who you are. And when something is part of your identity, you don't negotiate with it. A disciplined person doesn't wake up and ask, do I feel like doing this today? They do it because that's who they are. A focused person doesn't constantly get distracted and then wonder why they're not making progress. They protect their attention because they value it. A confident person doesn't wait for validation to take action. They move because they trust themselves. Do you see the shift? When identity changes, behavior follows naturally. But this is where many people misunderstand the process. They think redefining identity is about saying positive things to themselves and hoping those words magically become reality. But identity is not built through repetition alone. It is built through evidence. You don't believe something just because you say it. You believe something because you see proof of it. So if you want to become a disciplined person, you must start acting in disciplined ways, even if it's small. Keep promises to yourself. Do what you said you would do, even when you don't feel like it. Every time you follow through, you collect evidence. And that evidence begins to reshape your belief. At first, it feels uncomfortable because you are acting in a way that doesn't match your current identity. But that discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something is changing. Growth always feels unnatural in the beginning. You are literally stepping outside of the version of yourself that you've been living in for years. Of course, it feels strange. Of course, it feels difficult. But that's the process of transformation. And the more you repeat those actions, the more familiar they become. What once felt unnatural begins to feel normal. What once required effort begins to feel automatic. And slowly, without even realizing it, your identity starts to shift. This is why small wins matter so much. People underestimate the power of small, consistent actions. They think they need a massive breakthrough, a big moment, a dramatic change. But identity is not built in moments, it is built in patterns. Every day you are casting votes for the type of person you believe you are. When you show up, you cast a vote for discipline. When you stay focused, you cast a vote for clarity. When you push through resistance, you cast a vote for resilience. And over time, those votes add up. Eventually, you don't have to convince yourself anymore. You don't have to repeat affirmations to feel confident. You don't have to force discipline. You simply act in alignment with who you've become. That's when change becomes permanent. But there's another layer to this that you cannot ignore. Your environment. Your identity is influenced by what you're exposed to daily. The people around you, the content you consume, the conversations you engage in, all of these things reinforce a certain version of yourself. If you are constantly surrounded by negativity, doubt, and limitation, it becomes much harder to build a strong, empowered identity. Not impossible, but harder. So part of redefining your identity is being intentional about your environment. You don't have to cut everyone off, but you do have to protect your mindset, limit exposure to anything that reinforces the old version of you, and increase exposure to anything that supports the new version you're building. Listen to things that challenge you, read things that expand you, surround yourself physically or virtually with people who embody the qualities you want to develop, because identity is contagious. You become like what you consistently observe. And finally, understand this. Redefining your identity is not about perfection. It's about direction. You will make mistakes. You will have days where you fall back into old habits. You will have moments of doubt. That does not mean you failed. It means you're human. The key is not to let those moments redefine you. Just because you act out of alignment once does not mean you are that person again. Identity is not determined by a single action. It is determined by consistent patterns. So when you slip, you don't quit. You don't go back to the old story. You remind yourself of who you are becoming and you realign again and again. Because reinvention is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming intentional. You are not a fixed being. You are a dynamic one. You have the ability to evolve, to grow, to redefine yourself at any point in your life. But it starts with a decision. A decision to stop identifying with your limitations. A decision to stop repeating the same patterns. A decision to step into a new version of yourself, even before you fully believe it, because belief follows action, and action follows identity. So if you want to change your life, don't start with your goals. Start with yourself. Redefine who you are, and everything else will begin to follow. Break away from comfort and old patterns. One of the most dangerous places a human being can live in is not failure. It is comfort. Failure, at the very least, demands your attention. It forces you to confront reality. It pushes you to adjust, to rethink, to grow. But comfort is quiet. It is subtle. It convinces you that everything is fine while slowly stealing the life you could have lived. Comfort does not destroy you immediately. It slowly negotiates away your potential. And that's why breaking away from comfort is not optional if you want to reinvent yourself. It is essential. Most people misunderstand comfort. They think comfort means peace, stability, or happiness. But true growth and lasting fulfillment are not built inside comfort zones. Comfort zones are built to preserve who you are, not to expand who you can become. And if your current identity is limited, then staying comfortable means staying limited. You have to understand this clearly. Your current life is a reflection of the patterns you have tolerated, not just the actions you take, but the actions you repeat without question. Those patterns, your routines, your habits, your reactions, have created your results. So if you want a different life, you cannot keep repeating the same patterns and expect a new outcome. That's not transformation. That's self-deception. Breaking away from old patterns begins with awareness, but it requires courage to act on that awareness. Because once you see the truth about your habits, you can no longer hide behind excuses. You begin to recognize the ways you've been holding yourself back, not because you didn't know better, but because you chose what was easy over what was necessary. And that realization can be uncomfortable. You might realize that you've been wasting time. You might realize that you've been avoiding responsibility. You might realize that you've been settling for less than you're capable of. And for many people, that truth is difficult to face, so they distract themselves. They justify their behavior. They convince themselves that things will change someday, but someday is not a strategy. Reinvention requires a willingness to disrupt your own comfort. It means doing what feels inconvenient. It means stepping into situations where you are not the most confident, not the most skilled, not the most certain. It means exposing yourself to growth, even when it feels unfamiliar, because everything you want exists outside of what you currently find comfortable. Think about it. If your current habits and patterns were enough to create the life you want, you would already have it. The fact that you don't is not a sign of failure. It is feedback. It is showing you that something in your current approach needs to change. And change always feels uncomfortable at first. Waking up earlier than you're used to feels uncomfortable. Saying no to distractions feels uncomfortable. Taking responsibility instead of making excuses feels uncomfortable. Stepping into new opportunities where you might fail feels uncomfortable. But discomfort is not the enemy. Discomfort is the gateway. It is the signal that you are stepping beyond your current limits. It is the indicator that you are expanding your capacity. And if you learn to interpret discomfort correctly, it stops being something you avoid and becomes something you pursue because you understand what it represents. Growth. Now, let's talk about patterns, because patterns are powerful. A single action does not define your life, but repeated actions do. The problem is most people operate on patterns that were never consciously chosen. They are inherited. They are developed over time through repetition, environment, and experience. You don't wake up one day and decide to procrastinate. You fall into it gradually. One delay becomes another. One excuse becomes a habit. And over time, it becomes part of your identity. The same is true for negative thinking. It starts with a few doubts. Then it becomes a default response. Eventually, you don't even question it. You just accept it as truth. So when you talk about breaking old patterns, you are not just changing behavior. You are disrupting something that has been reinforced over time. That's why it feels difficult. You are going against what has become familiar, and familiarity is powerful. Your mind is designed to protect what is familiar, even if it is limiting, because familiarity feels safe. It feels predictable. It feels controlled. But safety does not equal growth. Predictability does not equal progress. If you always choose what feels safe, you will always stay where you are. So how do you break these patterns? First, you have to identify them clearly. You cannot change what you cannot see. Pay attention to your daily routines. Pay attention to your reactions. Where are you defaulting to comfort? Where are you avoiding effort? Where are you repeating behaviors that don't serve you? Be honest with yourself, not to judge yourself, but to understand yourself. Then once you identify a pattern, you have to interrupt it. Not someday, not when you feel ready, now. If your pattern is to procrastinate, you act immediately, even if it's a small step. If your pattern is to avoid difficult conversations, you lean into one. If your pattern is to quit when things get hard, you stay a little longer than you usually would. You break patterns by doing the opposite of what they demand. And at first it will feel unnatural. Your mind will resist. It will try to pull you back into what is comfortable. It will give you reasons, excuses, justifications. This can wait. You're tired. You'll do it later. But you have to recognize those thoughts for what they are, not truth, but resistance. And resistance is a sign that you are on the edge of change. The moment you push through that resistance, even once, you weaken the old pattern. And the more you repeat that interruption, the weaker the pattern becomes. Eventually, it loses its hold. But there is another element that is just as important: your environment. Old patterns are often tied to familiar environments. The places you go, the people you interact with, the routines you follow, all of these reinforce certain behaviors. If you are trying to break a pattern but you remain in the exact same environment that created it, you are making the process harder than it needs to be. Sometimes change requires distance. Distance from distractions, distance from negativity, distance from influences that pull you back into your old self. That doesn't always mean cutting people off completely, but it does mean being intentional about what you allow into your space. If you want to become focused, you cannot constantly surround yourself with distraction. If you want to become disciplined, you cannot normalize inconsistency. If you want to grow, you cannot keep feeding the version of you that resists growth. You have to create an environment that supports the person you are becoming, not the person you are leaving behind. And let's address something important. This process can feel lonely. When you start breaking away from old patterns, you may find that not everyone understands. Some people may question you. Some may feel uncomfortable with your change. Some may even try to pull you back to the version of you they are used to. That's part of the journey. Growth often requires separation, not because you are better than others, but because you are committed to becoming better than you were. And that commitment will not always be popular, but you have to decide what matters more, approval or progress. Because you cannot have both at the same time in the early stages of transformation. You have to be willing to be misunderstood for a while. You have to be willing to choose discipline over comfort, purpose over convenience, growth over familiarity. And over time, something powerful begins to happen. The things that once felt uncomfortable start to feel normal. The things that once required effort start to feel natural. You begin to develop new patterns that align with the life you want. Waking up early becomes part of who you are. Taking action becomes automatic. Pushing through difficulty becomes your default response. And what used to feel like discipline begins to feel like identity. That's when you know you've truly broken away. Not when it's easy, but when it becomes who you are. Understand this clearly. Your life will not change until your patterns change. And your patterns will not change until you are willing to step outside of what is comfortable. So don't wait for comfort to disappear. It won't. Comfort will always invite you back. The question is, will you accept the invitation, or will you choose growth even when it's difficult? Because on the other side of that decision is a completely different life. A life built not on convenience but on intention. A life shaped not by old patterns but by conscious choices. A life that reflects not who you were but who you decided to become. Build relentless consistency, not occasional motivation. One of the greatest illusions people live under is the belief that motivation is the key to success. They wait for it. They chase it. They depend on it. They believe that when they feel inspired enough, energized enough, ready enough, that's when they will finally take action and change their life. But motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes like the weather. One day you feel unstoppable. The next day you feel drained. One moment you are clear and focused. The next moment you are distracted and uncertain. If your progress depends on how you feel, then your results will always be inconsistent. And inconsistent effort produces inconsistent results. This is why reinvention cannot be built on motivation. It must be built on consistency. Consistency is not exciting. It does not give you a rush. It does not make you feel powerful in the moment. It is quiet. It is repetitive. It is often invisible. But it is the most powerful force in personal transformation because consistency compounds. What you do once has very little impact. What you do repeatedly shapes your entire life. You don't become disciplined by making one strong decision. You become disciplined by making the same decision over and over again, especially when it's inconvenient. You don't become successful by having one productive day. You become successful by showing up every day, regardless of how you feel. And that's the part most people avoid. They want the result, but they don't want the repetition. They want the outcome, but they don't want the process. They want the reward, but they don't want the routine. But life doesn't work that way. Anything meaningful is built through repetition. Think about it. Every skill you admire, every level of success you respect, every form of mastery you recognize, it all comes from consistent effort over time. Not occasional bursts of energy, but steady, deliberate action. And here's the truth. You will not always feel like doing what is necessary. There will be days when you are tired, days when you are distracted, days when your mind tries to convince you that skipping one day doesn't matter. And in isolation, maybe it doesn't. But patterns are not built in isolation. Every time you choose to skip, you reinforce a pattern of inconsistency. Every time you choose to show up, you reinforce a pattern of discipline. And over time, those patterns define you. So the goal is not to feel motivated. The goal is to become the type of person who shows up regardless of how they feel. That is where real power begins. You have to shift your mindset from I'll do it when I feel like it to I do it because I said I would. That shift changes everything because now your actions are no longer controlled by your emotions. They are controlled by your commitment. And commitment is stronger than motivation. Motivation gets you started. Commitment keeps you going. Now let's talk about what consistency actually looks like in real life because many people misunderstand it. They think consistency means doing everything perfectly every single day without failure. That is not consistency. That is perfectionism. And perfectionism is often just fear in disguise. Consistency is not about being perfect. It is about being persistent. It is about showing up even when things are not ideal. It is about doing what you can with what you have, where you are. It is about continuing forward even if your progress feels slow. Because slow progress is still progress. And progress, no matter how small, compounds over time. This is why small actions matter more than big intentions. You don't need to change your entire life overnight. In fact, trying to do that often leads to burnout. You start strong, you push hard, you overwhelm yourself, and then you stop. Not because you're incapable, but because you try to do too much at once. Sustainable consistency is built on manageable actions. Start with something you can repeat daily, something simple, something realistic, and then commit to it. Not for a day, not for a week, but for as long as it takes to become part of who you are. Because the goal is not just to do the action. The goal is to become the person who does it naturally. That's when consistency turns into identity. Now understand this, consistency requires structure. You cannot rely on willpower alone. Willpower is limited. It fades. It fluctuates. But structure supports you when willpower is low. This means creating routines. A routine is not a restriction. It is a system that protects your focus. When you have a routine, you don't have to decide what to do every day. You already know. And that reduces the mental energy required to take action. You remove decision fatigue. You remove hesitation. You remove the space where excuses usually appear. For example, if you decide that every morning at a certain time you will work on your goals, it becomes automatic. You don't wake up and debate with yourself. You don't negotiate. You follow the routine. And over time, that routine becomes a habit. And habits are powerful. Because once something becomes a habit, it requires less effort to maintain. It becomes part of your default behavior. But habits are built through repetition. There is no shortcut. You have to show up again and again until it becomes natural. And here's something important. You must learn to respect the process even when you don't see immediate results. Because one of the biggest reasons people quit is not because the process is not working, but because the results are not visible yet. They work for a few days, maybe a few weeks, and when they don't see a dramatic change, they assume it's not effective. But transformation does not happen on your schedule. It happens through accumulation. Imagine planting a seed. You don't plant it today and expect a tree tomorrow. You water it. You nurture it. You give it time. And for a while, nothing seems to happen. But beneath the surface, growth is taking place. Roots are forming. Foundations are being built. And then eventually it breaks through. Your effort works the same way. Just because you don't see results immediately does not mean nothing is happening. Something is always happening. You are building discipline. You are strengthening your mindset. You are reinforcing a new identity. And when those internal changes reach a certain point, the external results follow. But only if you stay consistent. Now let's address another challenge, disruptions. Life will not always go according to your plan. There will be interruptions. There will be unexpected events. There will be days where your routine is broken. And that's okay. Consistency is not about never missing a day. It is about never missing twice. If you fall off, you get back on. Immediately. You don't wait for the next week. You don't wait for the next month. You don't wait for the perfect moment. You return to your routine as soon as possible. Because the longer you stay away, the harder it becomes to return. And the more you reinforce the pattern of inconsistency. So don't aim for perfection. Aim for resilience. The ability to come back no matter what. That is what sustains consistency over the long term. And finally, understand this. Consistency is a decision you make every day. Not once. Every day. There will always be a reason to stop. There will always be an excuse. There will always be something that tries to pull you away from your commitment. But you have to decide again and again that you will continue. Not because it's easy, but because it matters. Because your future is built on what you do repeatedly, not occasionally. So don't wait to feel ready. Don't wait to feel motivated. Don't wait for the perfect conditions. Start where you are. Do what you can. And do it again tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. Until it becomes part of you. Because when consistency becomes your standard, success is no longer a question. It becomes a consequence. Master your mind and take control of your thoughts. If there is one place where your entire life is either built or broken, it is not outside of you. It is within you. It is in your mind. Long before your life takes shape in reality, it is first shaped in thought. Every action you take, every habit you form, every decision you make is influenced by the way you think. So if you want to reinvent your life, you cannot ignore the control center that governs it all. Your mind is not just something you have. It is something you must learn to manage. Most people don't realize they are being led by their thoughts instead of leading them. They wake up and whatever thought enters their mind first begins to dictate their mood, their energy, and their behavior. If the thought is negative, their day starts heavy. If the thought is doubtful, their actions become hesitant. If the thought is fearful, their potential becomes restricted, and they accept it. They assume that because a thought appears, it must be true. They assume that because they feel something, they must obey it. But that is not mastery, that is surrender. Reinvention demands authority over your inner world. You have to reach a point where you no longer accept every thought as fact. Because not every thought deserves your attention, and certainly not every thought deserves your belief. Some thoughts are rooted in fear. Some are shaped by past failures. Some are echoes of other people's opinions that you internalized over time. And if you allow those thoughts to run unchecked, they will quietly control your decisions. This is why awareness is the first step in mastering your mind. You have to observe your thinking, not occasionally, consistently. What do you tell yourself when things get difficult? What do you say to yourself when you fail? What is your internal response when you face an opportunity that requires courage? Do you encourage yourself or do you immediately doubt yourself? Do you focus on solutions or do you dwell on problems? Do you see possibility or do you default to limitation? Because your answers to these questions reveal the mental patterns that are shaping your life. And here's something important to understand. Your mind is conditioned. It has been trained over time through repetition, environment, and experience. If you have spent years thinking in a certain way, that pattern becomes automatic. It becomes your default response. But automatic does not mean permanent. Just because a thought appears quickly does not mean it is correct. It simply means it is familiar. And familiarity is not the same as truth. So once you become aware of your thought patterns, the next step is to challenge them. You don't just accept a negative thought, you question it. If your mind says you can't do this, you don't nod in agreement. You ask, based on what? If your mind says you're not good enough, you don't internalize it. You ask, who decided that? If your mind says you always fail, you interrupt it with evidence of times you didn't. You have to engage with your thoughts, not just experience them. Because the moment you challenge a thought, you weaken its authority. And over time, you begin to separate yourself from the automatic patterns that once controlled you. Now, this does not mean you will never have negative thoughts again. That's not realistic. The goal is not to eliminate every negative thought. The goal is to prevent those thoughts from controlling your behavior. You can feel doubt and still act with confidence. You can feel fear and still move forward. You can feel uncertainty and still take action. Because mastery is not about the absence of negative emotion. It is about the ability to act in spite of it. And that requires mental discipline. You have to train your mind the same way you would train your body, with repetition, with intention, with consistency. One of the most powerful ways to do this is through deliberate focus. Your mind will naturally drift toward what is easy, what is familiar, what is emotionally charged. But you can direct it toward what is useful. Instead of focusing on what could go wrong, you focus on what you can control. Instead of replaying past mistakes, you focus on present actions. Instead of imagining failure, you visualize execution. Because where your focus goes, your energy follows. And where your energy goes, your results begin to form. If you constantly focus on problems, you will feel overwhelmed. If you consistently focus on progress, you will feel empowered. The situation may not change immediately, but your perception of it will. And perception influences action. Now, let's talk about self-talk. Because the way you speak to yourself matters more than most people realize. You are in constant conversation with yourself, whether you are aware of it or not. And that conversation shapes your identity. If your internal dialogue is critical, limiting, and negative, it will slowly erode your confidence. It will make you hesitate. It will make you question your ability. It will make you shrink in moments where you should expand. But if your internal dialogue is constructive, encouraging, and disciplined, it will strengthen you. It will help you push through resistance. It will remind you of your capability. It will support you in moments of challenge. This does not mean you lie to yourself. It means you lead yourself. You speak in a way that aligns with the person you are becoming. When things get hard, instead of saying, I can't handle this, you say, this is challenging, but I will figure it out. When you make a mistake, instead of saying, I always mess things up, you say, this is feedback. I will improve. When you feel tired, instead of saying, I don't have the energy, you say, I will do what I can with what I have. This is not about being overly positive. It is about being intentional, because your words influence your mindset, and your mindset influences your actions, and your actions shape your life. Now understand this, your mind will resist this process. It will try to pull you back into old patterns. It will offer you familiar thoughts because they feel safe. It will test your commitment to change. And that's where discipline comes in. You have to consistently redirect your thinking. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. Every time your mind drifts into limitation, you bring it back to possibility. Every time your mind focuses on fear, you bring it back to action. Every time your mind tries to convince you to stop, you remind it why you started. This is not easy, but it is necessary. Because if you do not take control of your thoughts will take control of you. And when that happens, your life becomes a reflection of your fears instead of your potential. But when you master your mind, something powerful happens. You become steady. External situations no longer shake you as easily. Challenges no longer overwhelm you the same way. You develop a sense of control, not over everything that happens, but over how you respond. And that changes everything. Because life will always present obstacles. There will always be uncertainty. There will always be moments where things don't go according to plan. But your response determines your direction. And your response is shaped by your mindset. So when your mind is trained, you don't panic, you adjust. You don't quit, you adapt. You don't collapse under pressure, you rise through it. And over time, this mental strength becomes your advantage. While others are controlled by their emotions, you are guided by your intention. While others hesitate, you act. While others doubt, you move forward with clarity. Not because you are special, but because you are disciplined in how you think. And here's the truth. Mastering your mind is a lifelong process. It is not something you achieve once and never revisit. It is something you practice daily. Because every day you are exposed to new challenges, new thoughts, new influences. And every day you have to choose how you respond. You have to choose what you believe. You have to choose where you focus. And those choices repeated over time define your life. So don't underestimate the power of your mind. It is the foundation of everything. If you can control your thoughts, you can control your actions. If you can control your actions, you can control your direction. And if you can control your direction, you can change your life. But it begins with a decision to stop being passive with your thinking, a decision to stop believing everything your mind tells you, a decision to take ownership of your inner world. Because the moment you do that, you stop being a victim of your thoughts and you become the architect of your future.